Just Imagine, a new podcast series by Imagine Theatre.
Hello again, my name is Martin Ballard and this is the fourth episode of a series of podcasts from Imagine Theatre, one of the UK's biggest producer of pantomime and children's theatre. Now, if you listen to the first three in the series, you'll know that we take you behind the scenes at the company in each episode, meeting the people who create and star in Imagine Theatre shows.
For more information, go to their website at www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.
Now, before we start, don't forget you can catch up with any of the episodes you've missed so far at any time. In episode 3, we met the Scottish choreographer and performer Jane McMurtry. In this episode, I'm joined by a set and costume designer who's worked in the industry for more than 20 years on everything from musicals and plays to opera and, of course, pantomime. He is Mark Walters. How are you, Mark?
I'm very well, thank you.
Tell us a bit about your background, first of all, because this is something that I know absolutely nothing about. I appreciate the work that you do, and it's fundamental to the success of any show. But what came first for you, your love of theatre or your love of art and design?
Well, I suppose my first love was panto, and that was from a child. Little did I know that the designs I was in awe of on stage would become my career. But I actually, going back even further, I wanted to be in the police, and all my training was with the police force. So it's a complete career change to where I am today. But that's another story, I suppose.
So when you were at school, obviously artistic from an early age?
Yeah, I mean, art, drama, all those sort of titles were my favourite and what I excelled in. I'm far more artistic than anything else.
And so what happened in terms of your training? You were thinking about joining the police force, but were you studying art at the same time?
Well, what happened is I'd finished on my A-levels with the police, and I was meant to then do my police training. And there'd always been this niggling thing at the back of my mind going, I want to be involved in theatre somehow. And it was back when I was 16, 17, I wrote to Kenneth Alan Taylor at Nottingham Playhouse. And we created this bond and a special relationship, and he let me go backstage. I'd be watching everything that happened, and from there sort of went into the sort of crewing side of the shows. And then the years went by, and I started to do sort of part-time work at the Playhouse, running alongside my A-levels. Eventually, I was there so much that they offered me an assistant stage manager's job. Now, I had no experience in theatre at all, so I kind of learned everything I know in that area at the Playhouse.
And it's actually
fond memories.
It's a perfect theatre for panto, isn't it?
Yeah, because it's got that wraparound auditorium, so it's not too big, so it's nice. It's got a nice feeling to it. And then I was there for a few years. I worked my way up, and everything I know today was from Joe Rawlinson, stage manager there at the time. It got to the point where I could then sort of go into a DSM role, or I could go and do a degree. Now, I really wanted to do a degree, so I decided to go to drama school and do a stage management degree. And it was in the second year that actually the tutor said to me, look, you're doing so well in these modules of design, would you be interested in swapping courses? And at that time, it was a bit of a head spin because I was like, me, a designer, I'm not sure about that. The summer holidays passed, and I went back, and literally on that first morning, I just went, okay, why not? I'll change courses. And then that's where my design career sort of started.
So that might be an unusual route for a theatre designer, but you've come to theatre design with that fantastic knowledge of stage management and how it all works. That must have helped.
Do you know what? It really has helped because I've got such a knowledgeable background in all aspects of, how everything works, construction, scenic art, lighting. And it makes for a really good background for when you're designing a show, knowing, what is realistic, what's achievable. So it's been sort of invaluable.
And tell us a bit about the pantomimes in the early days, because that influenced Kenneth Alan Taylor, of course, one of the longest running dames and directors and writers of pantomime the country's ever seen. So what was that love? How did that first sort of inspire you?
Well, it was before I was 16, before I got to know Kenneth. It was the John Elvery designs that I was absolutely in awe of. I remember as a child sitting there and just being mesmerised by what was achieved on stage. And I was so immersed in everything that I saw. Even to this day, I've seen hundreds of shows over the years, but I just remember that first Cinderella that John Elvery designed down to sort of the minutest detail, even today. And so I suppose it's had a lasting effect on me.
And it's got to work. That's the key thing, isn't it? It's got to look beautiful but it's got to work practically and maybe have one or two tricks in there as well.
Well, that's the exciting part of Panto is, it has it all. It's got its transformation, so there's lots to get your teeth into from a design point of view. But it's so technical as well that, you really do have to know the ins and outs of everything.
From those early days then and from the training, what was your first job? Because you've worked around the country, haven't you? Where did it start?
My first commission as a Panto designer was at Kirkcaldy at the, I forgot the name of the theatre. The Adam Smith in Kirkcaldy, how can I forget it? And it was with Jonathan Stone and an amazing Panto director, one of my favourites. And that's where it all started. I was very nervous on my first one because up until that point, I'd assisted one of my favourite designers, Nigel Hook, who I assisted for a few years. And so it was me on my own in Kirkcaldy, and they took a huge gamble with me doing that show. It was Beauty and the Beast, and I just loved it, really loved it. But that was one of the first.
And how scary was the process? Because you've got to come up with the initial designs. You probably be in meetings with the creative team to talk about what the director wants and so on. And you're obviously nervous. You've got to get it right. But also you've got the whole process to go through for the very first time on your own. How scary was that?
It was nerve-wracking because there's so much with Panto that it's a given. And people just assume that you know it. They assume you know how the routines work. And, being witty with the set, even just basic scenery, how it works and the timings and all of that. And people just assumed at those meetings that I knew all of that. And so you'd be paddling like a fast, under the water going, oh, what am I doing here? And then I'd go and research all those routines that they thought I knew.
And of course, every theatre is different and you learn as you move along, don't you?
You do. Certain venues have very different styles, whether it's the Dame, the style that is, or it's we've got some contemporary pantos, some very traditional pantos. And again, your designs really have to work with that style.
In terms of an average job, let's say you were actually designing for a panto, how does it start? Does it come with a brief from the creative team?
More or less it does, yeah, from the producer or a director. But, I've been doing this, it's 21 years this year that I've been doing this, designing panto. I know, it's a long time. And I suppose you get a shorthand. In the early days, when you work with producers and directors, there's quite a detailed sort of breakdown and synopsis what they're looking for. But as the years go by and you do tend to work with a lot of the same directors and producers, there is a shorthand, as I said, in terms of it can be just a line, for instance, going the magic pool, and they know that I'll come up with something that they'll like. So it's mainly the new venues that I work with or new producers that it's more in depth.
And how long will that process take? Because, of course, when you first come to speak to producers and directors, there may not even be a script at that stage. There may be a scene structure, but that's pretty much it, isn't it?
It is. A good example of that is all the shows I did with Beric Kaler in York. And his scripts never came to fruition until first day rehearsals. And even then, they were very sketchy. It all came from the rehearsals. So even though they were daunting, they were quite exciting because it was a lot of design-led sort of scenes. So, we'd sort of workshop it in meetings and I'd come up with ideas and some would get thrown out and then we'd go with some wacky ones. And so that, from a design point of view, that was really exciting because you weren't dictated to with words and it all revolved around the set.
But in terms of the practicalities of it, would Beric, who's another fantastic legend of panto in this country, would he come to you with, I need an entrance here, an entrance there, this needs to be a cloth scene, this needs to have a truck or whatever? Would you get that much of a brief?
From Beric, not necessarily. He was really good, Beric, in that he would let you do what you want. He'd have very few requests, but you knew when he did request something like an entrance that had to be there. He didn't want too much, but what he did want, you had to give him. You knew that.
In terms of the process, you've got the brief, you come up with the designs. Where does it go from there?
So once all the designs are completed, we would then go out to tender to workshops and scenic artists who would cost everything up. We'd normally do that when at the sort of white card model stage with sort of colour samples, so you didn't go too far down the line. And then it's quite a big process actually, because there are so many scenes and there's so much time involved that this would normally happen in the early months of the year. And so we would go through each piece of model and what that entails and all the technical drawings, and it all gets costed up. until you end up with all your figures at the other end. And, you know, I'm one for always over designing. And so we'd always have to cut back. And then you go through that second process of, okay, we can't do that, but what can we do? And what's the most important thing to keep in the pot? And so you'd work that way until you come out the other end and the other process with a slightly changed model box and slightly altered cloths and slightly less glitter, which is always a downfall. You'd end up with a finished product that then would go to the workshops and the scenic artists to complete.
This whole process, you know, has a time scale. It has to make it work. It has to be ready in time for Technical Week at the very latest, doesn't it?
It does. And, you know, we start... So some producers like to start the previous year to a panto, but I like to start sort of January, February, start that process going, and then you're working all through the year. And then we'd come to a builders who like to start building sort of July time. Ideally, that would be the latest, because it does take, if you've got sort of 13 cloths in a show, they take such a long time to complete. And even then, you know, if workshops are busy, it can be touch and go if you get things on time. You know, I've been in situations where we've had all year to do this. Process has gone to plan, but then a workshop can, you know, be really busy or slightly behind, and you're getting cloths as they're painted during your tech period. So there's never enough time for a panto.
I'm just summing up all the skills that you bring to the table here, because you've got that background in stage management and how the stage and theatre works in general. You've then got the artistic training behind that and scenic design training and so on. You've even now got model making skills. I mean, it's quite a complicated job, isn't it?
It is. And, you know, I design costumes as well. So there's a background of sketching costumes, drawing costumes, colouring costumes. Picking colours is a minefield in its own right. And then you've got technical drawings, drafting all the scenery up. So it's all on paper for the builders to build. And then you've got all the cloths, which is original artwork to scale. And as you just said, you know, all the models. So you've got a white card. So actually you start at a sketch model, white card model, and then a finish model. And literally all those finishes on that model have to be to scale. So someone can follow it and reproduce exactly what you want.
Now, over the last 21 years or so, you've obviously built up experience, and I think it's fair to say built up confidence as well, because you always try to push the boundaries, don't you?
I do, yeah. And, you know, over 21 years, I've designed nearly 70 shows, and pushing boundaries is what you have to do as a designer. I think you can become quite stagnant if you just keep doing the same thing. And so recently, producers like Imagine being one of them have approached me with new ideas that they want to explore. And last year we did Croydon, which was a completely different style of panto. And that's what keeps it exciting for me as a designer, that you are completely changing how it looks and pushing those boundaries all the time.
Now let's give some background to this, because we're talking about the Fairfield Halls in Croydon. It's a great example of how pantomime has to evolve to stay pertinent, but also to move forward with technology in particular. And the Fairfield Halls, it's not a traditional theatre, it's more of a concert hall, so scene changes would have been impossible. There was no real wing space, correct me if I'm wrong. So Imagine came to you and said, we'd like to try something new here. Where did it go from there?
Well, when they came to me with this project, it was really exciting. And I was ready to go with it. And then we went to the venue. I'd never been to Croydon before. And then my heart kind of sank a little bit, because there is no stage as such. It's all open. There's no wing space. There's no proscenium arch. There's no proper fly bars. It's kind of a big open space with white walls, you know. So before we even started the design process, we had to create some kind of theatre and somewhere where we could hide all those, you know, all the wires and the fly bars. And so that was quite unique in that I had to start creating an environment that the panto that we designed, you know, could sit within. And that took quite a long time. And because there were no wings or scenery spaces backstage, we had to then come up with a completely different concept of how we could achieve this big scale production without the fundamental basics that you'd expect.
And that was in the form of some traditional theatre scenery, but a lot of screens as well, wasn't it?
It was, and we brought Nina on board, who is an animator. And working closely with Nina, we brought in all these LED screens, and the finished outcome, I thought, was amazing. And Nina managed to take all my artwork and turn it into 3D moving pictures. So we really did have to sort of collaborate together on that to create what was on stage.
And that must have been exciting because it was new, but quite scary again at the same time. So when you first sat in the auditorium and watched that show, how did it make you feel?
It was magical, to be honest, because when I first started out that process, I was so worried about how my artwork could still be my artwork and a Mark Walters Panto. And I know Imagine were quite keen to keep that. And you have to bring someone else into that process who has to take my artwork on. Obviously, they have to take that to another level to achieve the animation. But watching it, it was so magical because when you're painting pictures and I'm on my own and I'm creating these environments, they're all static. And yes, you can create movement with scenery that flies out or moves, but it's not the same as having a proper moving image in front of your eyes. And we managed to create scenarios where there'd be a love duet and all the mushrooms would start moving and, love hearts would come out. And it was all those things that in my head, when I'm drawing these pictures, would happen if they were moving images, traveling through that forest, the castle so as a static image, I would draw a castle through the trees. But actually, with this new idea, Nina could take us through those trees to the castle. So when I was watching those shows for the first time in the auditorium, it was magical because they were what I see in my head.
And there was a real buzz around this as well because of your design, and that's obviously put your name out there. In fact, you're very much in demand, and previously I know that you've worked all over the country. I mentioned that earlier on at various theatres, working with various companies in Liverpool and Hornchurch and various other places. But you're very much in demand now, aren't you?
Well, I wouldn't say demand. It's really odd because I never set out to have a career in Panto. In the early days, I would do the odd Panto, but it's like Panto has found me, and I've seemed to have created a whole world of Panto around me. Me and my partner have a Panto business as well, Glitter Pantomimes. I design all the scenery, and we've got a huge warehouse that we hire out. So yeah, over the years, it's just built up and built up. And well, last year, before pre-pandemic, I was approached by Kudos Panto to design the London Palladium. So I've been working on that for nearly 2 years now. Fingers crossed that it goes ahead this year. But I've been so lucky over the years to be in demand, I never become complacent about it. It's easy with Panto because a lot of people say, oh, it's just Panto. But you have to keep striving for better. And how can you make this 10th version of Cinderella I've done even better than the previous ones? So yeah, I'm very lucky.
Well, the London Palladium is the pinnacle in terms of Panto. It's probably the most famous theatre in the country anyway, but it's certainly the biggest Panto in the world at the moment, and that must be the ultimate challenge for you.
It is. I mean, my jaw dropped when I got that offer of the Palladium, because it's one of those venues where it's the best. And to do something that I absolutely love, designing all these Pantos and to be at the Palladium is a dream come true. So unfortunately, as we know, it didn't happen last year, but I've really got my fingers crossed that it will go ahead.
Well, let's talk about that because lots of the guests we've spoken to already have talked about the impact of COVID-19 on what they do. In terms of the design work, you can still be working at home on designs and stuff, but of course, none of those designs will ever come to fruition at the moment because the theatres have been closed. How's that affected you?
Well, in 21 years, I've constantly been on this treadmill of designing, lots of pantos and lots of stage shows, musicals, plays. And for me, it's always been spinning those plates. And then when this pandemic hit, it was over a 3-day period where literally everything I was working on came to a halt. It was either cancelled or I was told to stop and it was postponed. And that's pretty much, where I am today. I've been gradually doing bits and pieces in the background, but it's just stopped. And it's such a weird experience to step off that treadmill of design and hardly do anything. And it's been really hard as well because the design process is so involved. Once you start something, you know all the ins and outs of why you're doing every single aspect of it. And then to suddenly stop, and then a few months down the line, a producer could say, oh, we want you to carry on again. And so you try to pick it up, and then you stop again. There's a project I've been working on a year ago, and I've just started to pick that up again. And now I have to remember all those things that I was working on and why I'd chosen to do it that way. And so I'm now questioning myself going, well, why was you doing that, Mark? What's the purpose for that? And so it's taken such a long time to get back into that mindset of why I was doing that. And it's only now that I realise how important it is to keep that design process going and that wheel turning.
Well, we're keeping our fingers crossed that as we come out of lockdown in 2021, there will be performances, probably outdoors to start with, and then theatres will hopefully begin to open again. But there might be changes, Mark, and that might mean changes to the shows that you're working on. Budget changes, because it's been a tough time for theatres and companies. It may be that we have to do things differently on stage in terms of social distancing and so on. So are you bearing that in mind with the designs at the moment?
I mean, there's a lot of discussion for that, particularly in the last few weeks, as things are starting to slowly reopen and we realise what we'll be faced with in those winter months. But yeah, already producers are going, okay, how can we slightly cut this back? How can we use some of the old scenery we've got with some brand new scenery? And can you be clever so that we can save money and, with the cutbacks, make it still look as amazing as normal, but be creative with other avenues? And I think there's a lot of those discussions happening of how we can scale back, because we just don't know what's going to happen. And venues with reduced seating capacities is a huge factor, and it's all about reserving funds at the minute.
Sad, isn't it? It's challenging for everybody, but it's sad at the same time. While we're on the subject of the other stuff that you've done, from musicals and plays to opera and so on, how different is the challenge of designing for a play or a musical that is well known, the script is set in stone, the scene structure is there as well? Is that a different sort of challenge for you?
It is a different challenge because as you said, a lot of it's set in stone when you're doing a play. People, or a musical, people know what they're going to see. So there's a certain expectation of what you can do with it. But with Panto, it's very different in that, like I said with Berwick, it can be design-led. So you have free rein to create the world or the environment that the audience is seeing for the first time. And that's what's nice about that.
Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed that we can all be back with Panto this coming Christmas. I'm going to finish with 3 final questions for you. They're all Panto related. So, Mark, first of all, what's your favourite Panto title?
I think it has to be Aladdin. It's one of those stories it's the proper rags to riches. And from a design point of view, it's the one that I always find it's really exciting with the key moments in the show to get your teeth into. There's all the genie moments, the magic carpet, the cave transformations. You can do palaces that grow. And it's the one Panto that always looks, well, it has to look very different from all the other titles because of its Oriental, Arabian nature. So from that perspective, I think, it has to be Aladdin for me.
Yeah, and of course you've got plenty of sparkle with the riches and the palace and so on, but you've also got the comedy and the bright colours of the laundry. It's a real mix of the artist's palette, isn't it?
It is, and even the downtrodden scenes you can make sort of with a bit of spectacle to them. You can add more glitter to Aladdin, I find, rather than your barren, hard-up hall of Cinderella. There's always moments within the design for Aladdin that lend to a more opulent look.
Do you like to put a few jokes into the scenery as well, wherever you can? The laundry is a best example of that, or a street scene with interesting shop names and so on.
I think you have to. I mean, it's the one chance as a designer you get to have some fun. So you have to be witty, and Nigel Hook, who I trained with all those years ago, always used to have little comedy eggs in the corner of his cloths, or he'd hide pictures within it. And so I took that on. And so in some of my cloths, I will do silly pictures that you'd have to know what you're looking for, but there'll be comedy bits within it. So for people in the know, they'll know if it's the Mark Walters cloth with these certain pieces. I'm not going to tell you what they are.
No, but if you go and see a show designed by Mark Walters in the future, look very closely at the cloths.
Yeah.
Okay, the second question is, when has it not gone all right on the night? And I'm thinking from a sort of scenery point of view or a design point of view. Is there anything that you've maybe had to change completely because it just didn't work?
Not change completely. I mean, inevitably, because it's the first time you're trying out new ideas, things don't go to plan. But one thing, in all these years that just stick in my mind was a staircase that I did for Aladdin. And it was in Kirkcaldy, actually, the Adam Smith. And the director was saying to Aladdin during this transformation scene, I don't want you to look down as this magic staircase appears. And so I designed this huge platform. It was over 2 meters high and it had a flat wall below it. And during the transformation, the wall would appear and it would open, and these set of treads would slowly, one by one, would pull down stage until the entire stage was filled with this staircase and it would all light up. And during the tech, the director said to the actor playing Aladdin, when you come out and then you're just about to come down the staircase, don't look down. Whatever you do, don't look down because it ruins the magic. Find the spotlight, it's all singing, all dancing. And then during this key moment in the song, take your first step and follow the staircase down to the edge of the stage, and that'll be the end of the act. So it all went to plan during all the rehearsals, and then come opening night, we're all sitting there, all the kids are waiting, and the transformation's happening, and it's all a big spectacle. And Aladdin comes out, the music starts for the staircase to appear, and it got jammed. Now all our hearts were in our mouths because we knew on a certain piece of music Aladdin would step off. And earlier that day, obviously, the director had said to the actor, don't look down. So we're all thinking, oh no, what's going to happen? So as it got closer and closer to this bar of music, the director then starts screaming at the top of his voice across all the kids in the audience, look down, look down. And his notes that he was writing were in the air. And then he's literally arms jumping up and down, shouting, look down, look down. Meanwhile, all the kids around us thought it was, oh, this is part of it. So we had all these school children around us who then got to their feet shouting, look down, look down. At the time it wasn't funny, but looking back at it, we can all laugh at it. But the staircase didn't come out. Aladdin never looked down and he fell from the top to the bottom. No. Luckily, he was all right. And the curtain came down because it was the end of the act. But all these kids, it still makes me giggle right today.
And many of the things that go wrong, you can't really laugh about at the time. It takes a while, doesn't it, before you can actually laugh at them. And I've got images of the stage crew rushing on with a crash mat or something there. But thankfully, he wasn't hurt.
He wasn't hurt, and it could have been really nasty. But it is one of those occasions, of technical things in panto that can go wrong.
Now, you talked about your early days at the Nottingham Playhouse, and lots of people have been inspired by others, whether it be Kenneth Alan Taylor or you mentioned Beric Kaylor as well. But the final question has to be, why is panto so special for you?
I think it's special because it's one of those genres that there's something for everyone in it. Even if you're not a fan of panto, there has to be something within it, whether it's the slapstick, the comedy, romance, good and evil. So I think it brings people together, and I always have this thing that it's a child's first experience of theatre, and I always go back to me sitting there as like a 5-year-old child and just being immersed in it, and I still have that in my head. So with that, it just makes it so special that it is a family thing, and it's people's first experience for bringing them back into theatre later in life.
What's next for you, Mark? What sort of challenges lie ahead? Because I know you do other things, interior design, wedding design and stuff like that, I think, as well. What about TV or film, for instance?
I've done a little bit of TV work, and again, mainly children's TV, and going into that style because of the panto work. That's led me down that avenue. And I've got a few things that are lined up, not for this year, but potentially for next year. TV is very different to theatre. It's obviously it's not live, and I think that's my heart is theatre. So I will always pursue theatre. So we'll see. We've done a few TV things with us presenting and being on them, but my heart really is on the stage.
And with the stage in mind, apart from panto, anything else in the pipeline?
Ongoing work taken from last year. I'm doing the new tour of Strictly Ballroom with Craig Revel Horwood. Which is a lot of fun, actually. I'm really looking forward to getting that on the road. And obviously the Palladium, which we've talked about, and also a new production of Humpty Dumpty, which will be at the Newcastle Theatre Royal. Maybe this year. If not, it'll probably move to next year. But that's also all in my studio. So lots of exciting things.
Well, it's absolutely fantastic to catch up with you. It's been a pleasure, Mark. Thank you so much for talking to us, and I wish you all the best in pushing those boundaries in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Well, next time I'll be chatting to the singer and actress, winner of the 10th series of X Factor, and my panto buddy for the last 4 seasons, Sam Bailey. Don't forget you can still listen to any previous episodes, so make sure you subscribe through your favourite podcast app. In the meantime, that's it from me, Martin Ballard. I'll see you next time for episode 5 of Just Imagine, the podcast series from Imagine Theatre. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the latest edition of Just Imagine, the podcast series from Imagine Theatre. And you can find out more by going to www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.